Hello, welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. This is Dr. Greer, and I'm joined today with Linda Willitts, and we're going to have a discussion on the World Puja Network about the states of consciousness and non-locality of mind and how that relates to practical applications and contact with interstellar civilizations. So we think this is a really appropriate topic for the World Puja Network since the Puja, as all of you know, is really a ceremony that opens up the personal awareness to this unbounded cosmic mind that is the root of all conscious intelligence in the universe. So I'd like to thank the people at the World Puja Network for giving us this time, and we'll just get right into this. So one of the things that I wanted to point out is that part of my history, going back to my childhood, actually, and I talk about this in my book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, is that when I was about 17, I had a near-death experience, and I was very sick and had what some people would call a classic near-death experience, although it had some variations to it. And because I was raised an atheist, and I wasn't raised in any sort of spiritual tradition at all, it was quite an amazing thing that happened. And the way I had always related to spirituality was through nature and space and the cosmos. And so when I had my near-death experience, I went straight out into space and had an experience where the conscious mind that I experienced was more than just my individuality, but was really the universal mind. And it was a state of oneness. It's very, very hard to describe. It was so beautiful. And in that state, I had a sense that everything that existed was awake, that everything was the awake mind appearing as whatever it was, a star or a being or what have you. And it was just this state of complete and utter beauty and joy. And it was after that about 6 months later, I was sitting, and there's more to that experience. I'm just giving sort of like a really quick highlight of it. But about 6 months later, I was sitting on a mountaintop in North Carolina, up above in the town of Boone, North Carolina, and those of you who know that area of the state. And I was up on about a 5,000, maybe 5,500-foot mountain in October of 1973, and I had this experience where I just felt drawn that day to go up and sit where there was a fire tower at the top of this mountain and meditate. And so I went up there to sit to meditate, and I was doing a mantra meditation. And just before I got up there to meditate, I looked over to the kind of west-southwest, and there was a perfectly crisp, clear day. And in the sky, not too far away, was a beautiful silver disc. And this disc was, it didn't fly in, it just materialized there. And then it vanished. So as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. And at that moment, I thought, oh, well, I guess they're back, because I had had a sighting and some experiences when I was 8 or 9 years old, but nothing until this. So I sat to meditate, and sunset occurred, and I had a very deep meditation that lasted a very long time. And at the end of it, I stood up, and it had gotten dark, and it was such a crystal clear day in October, and very, very dry air. You could see the whole Milky Way, and it was stunning. And I as I stood up and I looked at space, a beautiful thought entered my mind that came from another dimension. It said, "Behold, what a beautiful universe God has made." And with that instant, I went into the same state of consciousness that I was in when I had my near-death experience about 6 months earlier in the spring of 1973. And while I was in that state, even though I was in my body standing on this mountaintop, the experience was that of perfect cosmic awareness and unity consciousness. And I became aware that there was this little being beside me on my right. And this being obviously had come from this disk, or the old-fashioned word would have been a flying saucer, and appeared on my right side, and I was wearing like a ski jacket, and he touched me on my right shoulder. And as he did so, I could actually look down and see the puffiness of the jacket indent. And at that instant, I went into such a state that my entire, all my hair stood on end. It was like there was this electromagnetic field. And I became very aware of the fact that this being was there. And, of course, I had the thought, being an 18, I just turned 18 years old, and I thought, what is this animal? And what does this animal want with me? And I couldn't figure out what this animal was. Initially, I was a bit confused, and then I realized it was a non-human being, but had the beautiful eyes of like a deer. So one of the most memorable things was that the face and the eyes were like that of a deer, very beautiful. And then I thought, well, I'm obviously not alone here. And then in an instant, I sort of dematerialized with this being, and we were on a craft, a spacecraft. And I go through this in the book Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, and this is how I, of course, got very involved in founding CSETI in 1990, many years later. But what I realized was that when I was having this experience, and in the aftermath, when I was on board this craft in this transdimensional state, that their interest was because I had an understanding without sort of the overlay of dogma and religion of the pure state of cosmic consciousness, which is the basis of all intelligent conscious life. And they had a great interest in the fact that there was this boy or young man of age 18 experiencing this. And that's why they visited me. And I knew that. In fact, I was told that. And what I tell people, when I tell people this story, I tell people there's nothing special about me except that I accepted the experience I had as a near-death experience and then began to practice meditation techniques using mantras. And I attended a puja, in fact, and learned this whole approach. And what happened in the aftermath was that I understood that what they wanted from me was to teach them how to with people in that higher state of consciousness and using consciousness to communicate. And it was actually then that the Close Encounter of the Fifth Kind initiative, what we call the CE5 initiative, was invented. It was in 1973 in October on this mountaintop with this contact experience with this ET that the concept of making contact with other civilizations using this expanded state of mind where an individual is awake but is aware of this universal component of consciousness. And that universal component of consciousness is the ultimate universal translator that enables people and beings to connect with each other across vast, vast distances, no matter how far out in space they are. And this experience was really the singular experience that has informed everything that we've done since then, although certainly I've studied and experienced many things in addition to what happened on that mountaintop in 1973. However, what was most remarkable about it is that they were just as interested in learning from us as we might be from them in terms of what it is like for humans to experience that state and be able to use it in a protocol and a practical set of communication protocols. And that's really, in a sense, why I say that it was then that the whole CSETI contact approach was co-created between humans and ETs in October of 1973. And that's what I've been pursuing and teaching people ever since. One of the really exciting things that I also have to remark, when I came back from this experience, I ended up further down this gravel road that led up to the top of this mountain than where I departed. And when I came back, I had an odd anti-gravity effect around me that I didn't understand until probably a few years ago when I began to understand the nexus of higher states of consciousness and magnetism and anti-gravity, the electromagnetic-gravitic effect, which we'll talk about in a moment. But that, and this is where you hear about mystics of the early Christian era or the Vedic masters or the yogis being able to levitate. And they can do that because of what I'm about to tell you, and that is that there is this nexus where consciousness and higher states of consciousness and this electromagnetic field kind of meet. There's a place where all that comes together, where mind and matter, and in a sense, the ability to create a field of energy that causes matter to become effervescent or almost invisible or weightless. And interestingly, that's exactly what ET technologies do electronically when the craft is present and it materializes and then it dematerializes. And by dematerialization, it doesn't mean it's not there. It's just that its resonance field is shifted, and it's shifted into this etheric, astral, conscious aspect of trans-dimensional reality. And what's wonderful about this is that if you understand what's folded within ourselves, inside our conscious mind, and our astral bodies, and our physical bodies, and how those are integrated and how they function together, you can understand how a spacecraft goes from the Andromeda galaxy to Earth, 2.5 million light years away, going faster than the speed of light. So actually, the whole idea of reading the book of your own soul, that reading the book of your own soul creates this ability to go from one star system to another. That if you understand this fundamental concept of the whole universe being conscious, and that this within this absolute unbounded field of awareness, are these multiphasic dimensions that go from the pure tonality of the purest thought to the largest galaxy and star system, and how it unfolds. And this is this unfolding from absolute unbounded nothingness that's awake, the unbounded self, into linear space-time is something that I write about and that we discuss a great deal in this new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, because it really is what has to be understood if you're going to make contact and understand how these ET civilizations make contact with humans, why it's often so enigmatic, and why it is something that is not purely a linear experience like a jetliner flying in and departing from John F. Kennedy Airport, that it's a whole new paradigm that has to be understood, and that it's not hard to understand it if you understand ourselves, if we understand who we are as humans. And that's what's really beautiful about this. It's a very alpha and omega sort of discussion. On the one hand, it's all about, we're talking about extraterrestrial civilizations and making contact, but in order to understand that, you have to understand our inner reality. So inner space and outer space come together on this issue in a very, very profound way.
I think what's really interesting about this in the ETs is that it's clear after having been on so many CSETI trainings that the ETs wait for us in this place of consciousness. I mean, they know that we're going to be there, and they wait for us to start to communicate in that place.
Yeah, and then once you understand that you're the awake mind, I mean, everyone listening to this radio interview needs to pause for a moment and think, okay, I'm hearing this interview and I'm awake, and then subtract all the things that you're thinking and hearing and just gently become aware of the mind that's listening. Not your ego, but that which transcends even your ego, and that is the awake being. That is this transcendent self. And you can do techniques in meditation. This is what mantras facilitate, for example, or mandalas, or other techniques that facilitate the individual letting go of this fixed sense of consciousness and mind being centered only in their bodies or in their heads or in their egos, and to this transcendent aspect of mind. and what some have called, Larry Dossey and others have called this non-locality of awareness. That is this aspect of the mind that's omnipresent. And what's also very important to realize is that whether or not we intellectually acknowledge this transcendent aspect of our pure conscious mind that's within us, it is always omnipresent. It's present in every point in space and time. So when we intend to do something, this is something that can be picked up, particularly when you're in a quiet state of mind and in a meditative state, by beings and civilizations, if that's what you're intending to connect with, that are also have a deep understanding of the science of consciousness, the science of cosmic awareness. And so that this is a central part of what we're using. And for many years, people have thought it really kind of absurd that we're doing some of these techniques, and then, of course, a spacecraft or an object or some unusual event takes place. But when you think about it, this is the only way it could happen. Because if you go faster than the speed of light, you're no longer linear. You can't be. Because if you go faster than the speed of light, which is beyond space, time, and matter, and faster than the speed of electrons and subatomic particles and all of that, you're in another dimension. And those dimensions are increasingly rooted in conscious intelligence. Now, everything is conscious, so there's kind of relative non-locality here, which we'll get into in a little while, which makes for some fascinating applications of this science of consciousness, what has been called in the Vedas the siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S, these what some would consider magical powers and abilities. But they're not magical. Magic is just something that someone doesn't understand. And one of the things that we have to be very humble about is realizing that most of what there is to understand and quantify in Western science hasn't been discovered yet. I mean, we're only a couple hundred years into the scientific method, and in fact, our instruments limit our ability to quantify these things. But that in reality, the civilizations that are hundreds of thousands to millions of years more developed than we are have technologies that interface with thought, with consciousness, with the so-called astral body of light that you fly around in your lucid dreams with, and that this is something that, even though it's something we can develop innately, eventually civilizations, including ours, will develop sciences and technologies that are able to cross beyond the speed of light and actually quantify and control those areas and dimensions so that we can travel amongst the stars faster than the speed of light and materialize from one place to another. Now, in the past, we know that certain enlightened masters have had these kinds of experiences, and there are all sorts of wonderful accounts. If those of you who've read a book like Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, and many other accounts of masters of the East and what have you, of being people who have been in a higher state of consciousness where they have dematerialized from one point and rematerialized in another, or bilocated, where their bodies were seen in 3 or 4 or 5 places at once, or where an object is materialized from one place to another, or out of thin air, where a master will materialize a ring or a jewel, or in some cases an entire village, and then have it dematerialize. This is something that it can be done just on the basis of consciousness itself, but if it can be done in consciousness, it can also be done technologically, and this is what people have to understand. And we're dealing with civilizations that get it. They understand the Vedas. They understand the power of higher states of consciousness, and they understand how to do this under scientific conditions. And that's why the communication modalities and systems that they use are ones that, even though if they have a black box that interfaces for communication, they're not just communicating like we are right now on telephones at the speed of light. I mean, if you're talking on a cell phone or your telephone wire, those signals are being propagated at the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles a second. So if you think about it, every second it travels 186,000 miles. which is almost all the way to the moon, which is about 250,000 miles away. However, if you're thinking of interstellar distances, that's really slow, because if you look at a really nearby star system that's 4 light years away, that's very, very close by. Well, if you were traveling or communicating with a conventional telecommunication system from AT&T or Apple or whatever, that communication from here to that star system and back, round trip, to say hello, how are you, fine, thank you, that would take 8 years, 4 years to get there and 4 years to get back. Now think about it if you're from Andromeda, which is 2.5 million light years from here. That means it would take 2.5 million years for the signal to get to Andromeda and 2.5 million years for that signal to get back. So to have a simple two-way conversation, the first exchange of a two-way conversation, hello, how are you, fine, thank you very much, that just took 5 million Earth years at the speed of light. So the bottom line is this, and this is actually the conversation I remember having with back in the 90s. I was asked to brief President Clinton's first CIA director on this issue, and R. James Woolsey. And Mr. Woolsey, being the CIA director, and the president were both interested in this issue, and they both knew that they were being lied to about the projects that were connected to it. And so I go through this experience in my book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which you can get at disclosureproject.org. And during the course of this dinner, we initially had some preliminary discussions that were very linear about policy and secret programs, and basically the CIA director was upset that he and the president weren't being allowed into these projects and were being lied to, but frankly. But during the course of dinner, once we sat down and had dinner, the CIA director's wife, Dr. Sue Woolsey, who was the chief operating officer of the National Academy of Sciences, turned to me and said, well, what I don't understand is how could they be communicating across these vast interstellar distances? And how is that happening? And I remember at the time thinking, oh, my God, do I lie to this woman in order to seem credible and scientific? Because, everyone wants to wear their science hats. And here I am, an emergency doctor and a medical doctor, meeting with one of the top officials of the most prestigious scientific body in the world, the National Academy of Sciences, and her husband, who is the CIA director. And I thought, I can tell her the truth and lose all credibility, or I can lie to her and sound scientific, even though I know it's not true. And I said, nope, if she's smart enough to ask the question, I'm going to assume she's ready to hear the answer, which is something I warn everyone who come on these week-long expeditions with me. Be very careful what you ask for, because I'm going to tell you what the truth is, and a lot of people may not like it. Now, what's interesting is that she did like it, and when I explained to her that the extraterrestrial civilizations visiting this planet were all evolved and developed to the point that they had technological interface with coherent thought. In other words, just like a laser, if you ever look at a laser light, that's actually coherent light. It's a specific type of light that when you go into a deep state of quiet consciousness and then remotely see in your inner sight, your inner vision, a distant star system or a spacecraft and connect to it from that deep level of consciousness, and then show them where you're located and vector them in, and like a beam of light from your mind to them and back, and show them where you are sitting right on Earth, whether you're sitting in Toronto or Mozambique or wherever you are right now. That very deep level of consciousness and thought emanating from that, from a very coherent level of expanded awareness, that they have technological systems that pick up on that as easily as we pick up on an AT&T microwave signal or a cell signal. And it's modulated through very advanced and subtle technologies that interface with this, what we call coherent thought, emanating from this matrix of consciousness, this expanded state of mind that is the stuff that's within all of space and time, that space and time has the fullness of unbounded cosmic being at every point in space and time, that it's not a reductionist divided reality, that any point, if you want to pick any place in your room, look around, the fullness of the unbounded is present at every point. And so knowing that, and knowing that there are these other realms between linear space-time and the unboundedness of mind, that there are technologies that interface with various forms, and some of these are thought forms and etheric forms and what have you, and that's how communication takes place interstellarly, at the speed really of thought, not at the speed of light. And she looked at me, the CIA director's wife looked at me and said, well, I thought it had to be something like that. And it was like, oh my God, she got it completely. So, what I've learned is that even though people don't want to admit that they understand some of these things, because we want to pretend like, we're just sort of, living in sort of our little linear box of industrial age stupidity. But in reality, people do understand this, and people have had experiences in their life where they've had a lucid dream, and it ends up being something of the future, and then it comes to pass. Or they've had a telepathic experience, or they've had a near-death experience. And, human experience is replete with millions of people having these sorts of experiences that prove the existence of this non-linear, non-local aspect of ourselves, and that there are other dimensions, whether it be the worlds of light and of etheric and astral or thought or what have you, that are out there and that are within us at the same time. And that if we really think about it, civilizations that have evolved to the point that they can go faster than the speed of light and travel amongst the stars, they've had to master not only the sciences and technology, but first they've had to master this understanding of non-locality, of consciousness and of mind. Otherwise, they could never have gone faster than the speed of light. So this whole trans-dimensional aspect, that where you drop out of linear space-time into this conscious multiverse, this is really the first step of being an interstellar civilization. So I tell people, if they're here, if these ET civilizations are here, and we've proven that they are through the Disclosure Project, then the only question to ask is, what do we need to learn to understand how they might appear, how they might communicate, and what their expectations might be of us? Maybe they don't want to necessarily communicate all the time with the SETI Arecibo radio telescopes that are moving at the speed of light. Boring. Maybe they are expecting us to at least understand what the Vedic masters knew 10,000 years ago. You see? So maybe there's some expectation on their part that we wake up, understand who we are as beings, and begin to practice these capabilities. And I think that's really what one of the big meta themes or big meta messages, overarching messages, are. That the ETs are communicating, and that is that by virtue of even how they appear and disappear and communicate, they're opening up to us a portal into not only our future, but our potential and what lies within the human capability.
I know that there's been cases of people who've communicated with ETs when they didn't even necessarily intend to or know anything about this, just spontaneously. Maybe not even people that were necessarily tuned into ET craft, but they were outside at night and they noticed something beautiful in the sky that was there, and then it disappeared, and then they just thought to themselves, oh, I wish it would come back, and it did. So that was the communication that they, kind of intuitively got, was the communication. But what I think is really interesting about that is, with the ETs being so high up in the atmosphere, they can't even see a person on Earth, how do they know that that person is consciously communicating with them?
Well, because if I have always said that I think they have detectors that sense directed attention.
Okay.
So if the person has a directed attention at them, they're picking up on that. It's like a beam. If you look at, if you shine a flashlight at someone and you're at the right angle, they see it. If you're not, they don't see it. Or in the same way, if someone's intent and concentrated awareness and thought is directed right at an ET object, that ET object picks up on it because their technologies, their communication systems are transdimensional and cross into this area of intent, consciousness, and thought. And in fact, back in the 90s, when I first started considering whether to start this project and how to formulate it, I collected a whole lot of cases from the UFO literature of exactly what Linda was just mentioning, and that is the numbers of people who had spontaneously engaged in a consciousness CE5, close encounter of the fifth kind, which is when humans intend to interact with a craft. Now, it doesn't always have to be through consciousness. You can signal with a light. You can do it a lot of ways. But I found that in a certain number of cases that went beyond, say, a jet pilot signaling with their landing lights to the UFO and the UFO signals back. We have many of those. But this would be cases where people did exactly what Linda was mentioning, and that is that they would see an object and they would think, oh, I wish it would move to the right so I could see it better, and it would slide over to the right. Oh, I wonder if it will move up if I think that, and it would move up. Where it was doing an exact interface as if to say, we see you, we can pick up on your directed thought, and your directed thought is being picked up by us, and we can respond to it. And I found that there were dozens of cases like this. And later, Dr. Richard Haynes of NASA, who had worked at the NASA Ames Research Center, did a book called CE5, where he documented all kinds of interactive events like this from all over the world. And, of course, he did that sort of in collaboration with me, but it was his book, and he did a very, very good job. And I think that the other thing that we learned, of course, we had Colin Andrews who invented the term crop circle, and as you all know, we're going to England this year and July, and also that we'll be having an event in Arizona in October
2nd through 4th.
Yeah, the 2nd through 4th, where we're going to have Richard C. Hoagland and the Mars mission update, as well as Colin Andrews of Crop Circle fame. And years ago, back in 1991, when I first met Colin Andrews, and I was presenting this concept of close encounters of the fifth kind and the consciousness component of this, he told me something that he kept secret for many years, but he told me this in 1991, and he shared it at Rio Rico this past year, and we're going to expand on that this year at Rio Rico, Arizona. It's south of Tucson, where we're going to be gathered with a couple hundred people out under the stars every night in a mass contact event, which you are all invited to. You can find out about it at CSETI.org if you want information on that. And one of the things that was very interesting is that he said that when he and Busty Taylor were flying over some of the very early crop circles in the late 80s, that there were different kinds of crop circles that had appeared. And Busty and Colin were just in the aircraft and were saying, gosh, wouldn't it be great if there was a crop circle that would combine all of these different types of circles, crop circles that we've seen, into one that very next morning, one just exactly what they were articulating and thinking about appeared in a crop circle field, and they had told no one else about it, and they certainly didn't hoax this one. And he knew instantly that there was a conscious interface between the beings making these crop circles and what they were thinking and saying. And then, of course, in 92, those of you who have studied what we've been doing, and the account of this is actually in the new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, as well as the DVD actually shows this crop circle on it. There's a free DVD that goes with this book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation. in '92, we went up on a place called Woodborough Hill in Wiltshire, which is the same county that Stonehenge is in, and a lot of ancient places like Silbury Hill and Avebury and these sort of places. And we went up on this hill, and we decided that we would try to contact the crop circle makers, whoever they were, and with sort of an interactive experiment. And so we went up there with about 12 people, and we had not decided what kind of shape we would use in our awareness and in our meditation to send to them. But once we got up on this hill and we set up our circle, we decided on a triangle, which is made of 3 circles connected by lines that we would project to the ETs and ask them to make a crop circle exactly like that somewhere nearby. So we did that, and it turned out the very next morning a farmer had gone out in his field very early, 4 or 5 in the morning, to try to take the wheat in while it was dry, and there was exactly that shape in a field within line sight of where we were at a place called Oliver's Castle. And once we learned of this, I remember Sherry Adamak and myself and others, and Ron Russell, just in a state of just stunned disbelief as we climbed up on this cliff and looked down to see exactly what we had in our minds had visualized and projected in this deep meditation to the ETs, and that exact crop circle. And no one who wasn't on that hill knew about it. And we were up there till the wee hours of the morning, and within 3 or 4 hours of there, the farmer had found it in the field. And we had not spoken of this to anyone. We didn't even decide on the shape until we got on top of the hill. So that's when, the full interactivity of this came to view, where it was quite clear that in a deep, quiet state of meditation, that these ETs are capable of contacting us, but also receiving a clear message and responding to it in a very, very specific way. So I think that that's one of the really exciting things that we continue to do, and the root of everything that we're doing with this project has to do with the knowledge of the fact that everyone, not just special people or people who have had a lot of years in meditation, but everyone is conscious, and that higher conscious sentient beings, whether humans or extraterrestrial, are all linked into this nexus, this central communicating domain of awareness, and that all you have to do is to sit quietly, engage in some type of technique that's effective for you, which, of course, we have our own that we teach that you're welcome to get on our meditation CDs. But whatever works for you is great, and become centered and silent. And then from that deep, quiet level of awareness, you can then see remote places, which is what remote viewing is. Or you can see the future, which is precognition. And you can then see these extraterrestrial people, their spacecraft, their civilizations, and invite them to interact with you and show them where you are. You can actually visually zoom in from outer space to our solar system, to the Earth, to the country you're in, to the town you're in, to the field you're sitting in. And that's what we do. And it's that coherent thought sequencing, as we call it, which emanates from this deep level of pure, quiet mind, is something which is immensely effective, very, very effective. Now, it's most effective when you do it first from a quiet state of consciousness, that if you sit and meditate and go into a deep state of consciousness where you're letting go of linearity for a moment, sort of getting out of your own way, as it were, and transcending linear space-time, thought, self, that relaxed state of mind puts you in more clarity into this deep, silent state of mind that is omnipresent. Most people kind of stay in a fixed little box of their own personal awareness and self and ego and what's around them. But in reality, the conscious mind, that even as you're driving down the road, for example, the conscious mind that is enabling you to see the road, make a right-hand turn, read the road sign, everything, that mind is actually omnipresent. And if you acknowledge that and begin to practice it, you can have all kinds of practical applications. And this is something that I wanted to talk about. One of the things that I write about in Hidden Truths, Forbidden Knowledge, this autobiography I wrote, is that as an emergency doctor, frequently, and this has happened many times, not just once or twice, I would have a patient that I would sense something that wasn't overtly obvious, and I would see it. And I tell this one story of a 26-year-old man that came in during flu season, and he had all the symptoms of the flu. He was coughing, and he had a fever, and he felt nauseated, and blah, blah, and the usual yuck. And so one of the nurses, of course, he was 26 years old and had a wife and 2 children, and put him in one of just the regular medical rooms. And when I walked in there, and I saw a brain tumor. I saw a brain tumor in his brain, in his head. And there was no symptoms that he had. He wasn't having paralysis or seizures or any focal neurological issues. But anyway, I just saw it, sensed it, felt it. So I turned to the nurse and I said, I need a CT, CAT scan of the head. And she said, this was in North Carolina, and she says, well, Dr. Greer, he just got the flu. And I said, just do it, okay? And so she did. Luckily, there wasn't some bean counter at an HMO or a PPO or a insurance company who could disapprove my order, since I was in the emergency area. And we got it, and the radiologist called back on a stat basis and said, this man has a massive brain tumor that is herniating his brainstem, which means it was pushing his brainstem down through the base of his skull, where it was pressuring the areas that would cause nausea and a fever and all these symptoms. And ultimately, of course, he went to neurosurgery, and the neurosurgeon called me and said, how did you even think to get a CAT scan of this? And, of course, I couldn't say to this neurosurgeon that, well, I remote viewed this brain tumor in his head. But I said, well, I just had a hunch. He says, well, I would have just treated him with something for the flu and sent him out the door. So this is an example. And for years, this man would come in to the ER and, thanked me. And, and I realized that, what I tell people is that developing these states of consciousness, I don't care if you're a pilot, a doctor, whatever you do for a living, there are amazing applications that are practical and even life-saving to having your intuitive ability develop. That this higher state of consciousness has enormous applications for anything. I don't care if you're building a house. You might have a precognition that something's been missed and be able to fix it before the roof falls in on you or something. There are all kinds of things. And even driving down the road, is there an accident up ahead? And often I have seen an accident before I come across it, many times, in fact. And so I think that what people have to understand is that this ability to be, everyone's aware and awake, but you can become super aware and super awake, and you can take the time to meditate and develop these abilities. That this ability resides within every single human being. And it's not, forget about laying on a bed of nails and having to be in a cave and a yogi. But you do have to practice some kind of technique and mindfulness to develop it. And once you intend it and develop it, it's like a muscle. If you work the muscle, it's going to get stronger. The mind is the same way. These abilities and consciousness are the same way. Most people simply neglect them. They're too busy looking at Jay Leno and eating Cheetos, or looking at reality TV or some other brain dead pursuit. If people took an hour a day to spend in quiet meditation and do this, they would be astonished how in 6 months they would awaken to these abilities. And once the mind begins to expand, you then get these other powers and abilities that spontaneously begin to develop, whether it's telepathy or precognition, or eventually even things like levitation and being able to materialize things or intend things. So these are all things that develop innately. Now, in the case of these extraterrestrial civilizations, they understand the science of consciousness very well. And, of course, as many of you know who have done the Pujas and studied the Vedas, the tradition is that the Vedas really came from Sirius and the Orion sector of space, which I think they literally did. But that these civilizations really do understand this to the point that they have not only the innate understanding, which all of us can develop, but also that they have technological assist. And I call this technology-assisted consciousness. And there are other systems that are consciousness that assist their technologies. So these extraterrestrial civilizations, the beings, the life forms, are actually consciously wired into their spacecraft and their communication systems. And that, the people I know who've worked on spacecraft that have been shot down tragically by our misguided classified projects have recounted that the beings are actually touching and are bioelectrically and consciously wired into it, and that the spacecraft itself is like a living organism. It's a conscious nanobiomachine. Conscious nanobiomachine. At the level of nanomolecular technology, it's actually living. It's not like, something that you would get out of Detroit where everything's bolted together in a bucket of bolts. It's or something that Lockheed would make, which is also a bucket of bolts. Even though they're anti-gravity and pretty cool, I wouldn't mind having one of these man-made flying saucers. But the actual ET ones are conscious and living, and that they're at the point where the spacecraft themselves are so developed that they take on the awareness, it's sort of like artificial intelligence, of their occupier, of their pilot, and of the commander, and of the people on board. And so this is why so many of the experiences we have are so bizarre, frankly, to most people. When they hear that we're sitting out on Mount Shasta, and we have this event happen where a tone omnidirectional emerges from the space around us, sitting in the middle of the national forest, and everyone sitting in the circle sees in their mental imagery the shape of the spacecraft as it's zipping through the area transdimensionally. That happened, and it's happened more than once. So you're dealing with things that, an understanding and a study of what many people dismiss as metaphysical mysticism is really not irrelevant at all to this understanding of transdimensional interstellar civilizations. In fact, it's the central understanding. And that's why I said we have to move beyond this thing of, kicking the tires of the UFO, which is where everything's remained for the last 50 years, to understanding the reality of a civilization that can go faster than the speed of light and then materialize or manifest in some way right in our atmosphere, like we recently had happen. Well, at Rio Rico last year, those of you who have the new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, the DVD has a picture that a member of our team took of this almost a tetrahedral-shaped craft materializing right over this group of 200 people at this hotel rooftop where we're going to be gathering in October. We're going to be there again in October from the 2nd to the 4th. And I think that what people have to understand is that this can take place very, very quickly and in a way that the naked eye may or may not see it, but now these digital cameras are beginning to pick up on it. And, of course, same thing with the electronics that happen. We have these transdimensional electronics where there's actually conversation happening through the tonality of these laser detectors and radar detectors that we have out in the middle of the national park or out in the middle of nowhere, which is quite bizarre to people. I mean, it takes a long time for people to get their minds around what in the world is going on here. But all of these manifestations make sense once you understand non-locality of space, time, consciousness, and thought, and the fact that these ET civilizations have mastered it in order to travel faster than the speed of light from other galaxies and other star systems to Earth. And they want us to understand it so that we can interact with them in a number of different ways, both consciously and physically, like we do, but also in dream time. For example, I think one of the most profound ways that people have actual contact with these civilizations is in the lucid dream state. And the reason for that is that when people are in the waking state, they're so fixed on linear space-time and ego and their bodies that most of what exists in the cosmos is out of sight and out of mind. Whereas when they're asleep, their consciousness becomes more relaxed, and then their astral body, the body of light that you can fly around the universe with, actually is in a state of greater freedom. It's like the bird being let out of the cage, and it can fly around. And in that state, the ETs find it often easier to deal with humans because they're in a more relaxed and open-minded state. And I have had many experiences with ET civilizations and beings in that lucid astral state of mind in dream time, as the Aboriginals of Australia call it. And this is something you can also develop. One of the things that we teach at these CSETI training sessions is the mindfulness of going into sleep in a meditative state and then intending to be awake in your dream and to be aware and to invite these extraterrestrial civilizations and people to interface with you. And we've had people who've had astonishing events. Just recently when we were in Crestone, Colorado, with ETs doing this, in fact, where there would be a whole group of people the same night having these sort of events happening at a hotel where they were staying in Crestone, which was very unusual, as well as a lot of strange electromagnetic events happening at the same time inside the rooms of people and around the hotel. So all of this is all quite a bit to learn. Of course, I mean, we'll find that it's kind of hard to do that in a 7-day period, but or a week period. But you know, one of the good things is that before people come, we give them a whole training set, so it has the meditation techniques and the concepts and the ideas. But it's really quite a mind-expanding thing to experience. And most people find that once they begin to understand a few basic principles and give themselves to it and say, look, I can do this, just all kinds of beautiful things occur very quickly.
It never fails to amaze me the variety of ways in which the ETs communicate with us out in the field. I mean, we call these trainings, and they're trainings for the new people, but they're trainings for those of us that have been going for years and years and years as well, because it's always different. And the ETs are clearly training us. They're participating in the training, and they're doing things on purpose to show us new means of communication and to train us. It's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that anyone who is open to it finds that the ETs are going to contact them in one way or another. Something happens that confirms it. And the reason for that, I mean, let's back this up a little bit. You know, Hillary Clinton isn't heading an interplanetary diplomatic effort. Neither is the head of the United Nations, and nor is, to my knowledge, any other world government or national government. And so in the absence of that, think about it. We're now, 60, 70 years into the nuclear era, the space era, and the era when there has been this huge increase of UFO sightings all over the world. And who's responding? Who? Well, you have the classified projects that operate outside the control of the President and the Congress that are shooting at them and have been trying to study their technologies. but there's no organized effort to make peaceful, open contact. That's what we're doing. And to be honest with you, the reason we keep having all these amazing things happen, I believe, is that I don't know that we're so great, but we're kind of, at least we're trying. And, the point is that this effort is greatly appreciated by these civilizations because they want humans to go from the current state of, an awareness of only Earth and destroying this planet to what's out there, not only consciously within ourselves, but what's out in space and what that might mean for how we can live on this planet. And it has very, very practical implications. A lot of people hear about this and say, well, this is all very interesting. What does that have to do with the fact that we have global warming and BP gushing 100,000 gallons of oil every day into the Gulf of Mexico, killing the entire ecosystem? And I'll say it has everything to do with it, because these technologies and the sciences that deal with this entire subject would have replaced oil before I was born. I mean, I doubt there's anyone listening to this interview who was born before the time that classified projects had sciences and technologies that would have replaced this. Because I remind people that T. Townsend Brown and Nikola Tesla and many of these other geniuses of the early and mid-20th century understood and had things operational based on these sciences that were high-voltage, phased electromagnetic systems. And, of course, I have worked personally and met with people who have been in highly classified, way above top-secret programs who've built these systems. And here we sit still burning oil and gas and coal and, basically despoiling our nest unnecessarily. So this whole issue has enormous implications because, and by the way, one of the chief reasons why all of this is such a topic non grata in official power circles is that you cannot acknowledge the existence of these civilizations and of these UFOs without acknowledging the fact that they're moving around our atmosphere at multiples of the speed of light, and even when they're fully materialized at enormous speeds, without any sound, without any fuel being expended. Where are they getting the energy? How are these things going? Well, they're pulling energy from the fabric of space-time itself and from this so-called quantum vacuum and zero-point energy field that's omnipresent throughout the cosmos. And once that's understood, then people say, well, heck, if that's what they're doing and we understand it in a classical way, why the heck am I still paying $3-4 a gallon for gas? Why am I still contributing to global warming? Why are we still buying Exxon and BP oil? Why am I paying a utility bill that's hooked up to a coal-fired power plant that's blowing up the Appalachian Mountains with mountaintop removal mining to get it? This is not a trivial issue. But, of course, tied to that at the same time is the fact that people would prefer folks not to know this because they want people to be ignorant and they want people to be dependent. And I say that it's time for a whole new period of liberty and freedom on this planet that acknowledges universal peace, and that these sciences, both in consciousness and in these technologies, are brought forward and unveiled to benefit humanity and the planet. And we can have a planet and a world and a future on Earth that is just beyond our wildest dreams. I mean, the potential of what's here right now, if we come together, make open contact, create a peaceful civilization, but also work to bring these sciences and technologies out, that world would be more different than the world we have today than today is from 10,000 years ago. And it can happen in a generation. The elimination of poverty, the elimination of all pollution, of want, of this sort of enormous injustice in the world where we have 40% of the planet that does not even have plumbing and toilets, as a true statistic, that this can change very, very rapidly, and that we people on Earth today have to come together and say we're going to work on this, and that's what Linda and Dr. Bravo and Dr. Loader and myself and all the other people who worked for so many years on this are doing, and we welcome you to participate and to look into this. And you can find out more about what we're doing at disclosureproject.org and also at CSETI.org for these training programs. And for the energy research program, you can go to theorionproject.org. Well, I think we're about out of time for today. I'd like to thank the World Puja Network for allowing us to have this hour with you every couple of weeks, and I'd like to thank Linda for joining me, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.